friends, and welcome to episode 1 of Neurotypical Social Skills, taught by me. Not a neurotypical, not in any way, no. Now, as I said in my intro to the series, which you can watch up here, neurodivergent people do not have defective social skills. We just have different ones. And it's just kind of a cultural difference between neurotypes. Also, we'll be saying neurodivergent social skills rather than autistic social skills, and I want to clarify that I am not equating the two. I know that people do have a tendency to say neurodivergent as a catch-all for autism and ADHD kind of exclusively, and then forget about literally all of the other pieces of neurodivergency. I am planning to make a video about that at some point, don't you worry, but I'm talking here kind of about the cultural situation of being neurodivergent in the same way that you would talk about disability or queer cultural norms, while knowing that each individual subgroup is slightly different within those overarching umbrellas. And in my experience, all neurodivergencies, autism, ADHD, PTSD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, DID, CP, etc., all of those socialize kind of in a similar way that is culturally different from the general norm. And like I mentioned in my last video, I am also starting to believe that neurotypicality doesn't exist anyway and that everybody could use some sort of social skills training. So we are going to begin this series today by talking about boundaries because in my experience of neurotypical relationships, boundaries are the biggest thing that neurodivergent people mess up because they're harder to understand and pick up on, at least with the neurotypicals, which is completely understandable, but it can also cost you a lot of relationships throughout your life. So today we are going to talk about what neurodivergent boundary setting looks like, what neurotypical boundary setting looks like, and how we can find a bit of a middle ground of accessibility and understanding between the two. You don't have to change who you are, and you are not wrong how you are, but there is a cultural difference that we do need to understand, and neurotypicals aren't really doing that work, so we kind of have to, which is annoying. But then we can interact better with all kinds of people. So we're going to spend most of today focusing on how typical boundaries work, but again, a big part of understanding how our culture does this and how and why we struggle with it is part of this, so I hope that our neurotypical allies will also watch to the end so that they can learn about how we work as well. So, without further ado, let us talk about why boundaries are hard. For anybody really, but especially for neurodivergent people in a neurotypical world. So, the first and most obvious reason here is that one of the core pieces of being a marginalized identity is that you are effectively steamrolled by the world and people rarely respect your boundaries no matter how hard you try to express them clearly. Don't believe me? Think about how many chronically ill people say they can't do a thing and then everybody else responds with, "No, you can't do it. You got it." Or "Push yourself. It'll make you stronger." Or, what happens when an autistic person really doesn't like hugs, but then their whole family continues to hug them anyway. Or when somebody with severe social anxiety is pushed into social situations because it's good for them. So you can't expect us to have good skills in the boundary setting area and understanding and respecting boundaries if you've been breaking ours daily for our entire lives, because we don't know what an effective boundary looks like. We're often taught that you know somebody's crossed your boundaries because you'll feel uncomfortable or anxious, which, sure, but also when you always feel uncomfortable and anxious because you don't fit into the world that you have been plopped into, it's really hard to know what is normal discomfort and what is boundary crossing discomfort. And if we do find somebody who doesn't ignore us or bully us or act like a general prick in our direction, we do have a tendency to get overexcited. I mean, this is our one chance. And then they become a special interest and we kind of hyperfixate on them and that can get messy quickly. However, there is this idea in our culture, and by our, I mean society, not by autism culture and neurodivergency culture, that obsession and interdependency is bad and that coming on too hard shows that you're desperate and that's a problem and you're a red flag of a human, and that you should be unattached with new people. And that makes for a lot of shame for the people who jump all the way into relationships from day one. And there is absolutely no shame in being really close to somebody, in having a new person be a special interest. There's no shame in not playing hard to get. I personally quite prefer being very obvious in myself befriending people and vice versa, as long as it's not causing harm or violating boundaries or unworthy idolship rather than an equal relationship. Making friends like this can be quite positive too. It shows that you're caring and you're loyal and you're compassionate and you're excited about this relationship and you learn a lot about the person in a really short time. It's kind of like lesbian U-hauling, but friendship version and also not just lesbians. And it's often not even an issue at all. Many people find it really refreshing, but some other people see it as too much and violating boundaries and then they ghost you, which is really awkward and that happens a lot too. Now that brings us to the third reason boundaries are hard. So many people think that they have set a boundary and gotten the information across that they are setting a boundary when we have absolutely no clue. Like, absolutely none. Because as we're going to talk about in a wee bit, boundary setting can be uncomfortable and awkward, and so people kind of try to beat around the bush to make it less awkward, without realizing that they're also making it less functional, because in my mind, no boundary has been set. So of course I'm going to violate that boundary, and you're going to get mad at me, and I'm going to be confused, and it's going to be really gross. And this also leads to a lot of situations where we're like, I was just trying to help, when other people think that it's not your place to do that, but you had no idea. Or on the other hand, being so nervous about breaking those boundaries that you just completely freeze up and then you don't do anything, which makes you kind of a bad friend. It can also be hard because coping with change is really, really difficult. So if you've always done something specific with somebody and then they set a boundary saying they actually don't like you doing that, it can be really hard to adjust to that change in your relationship. And that is completely normal too. Now, another thing that I didn't know about until I started learning specifically about friends and boundaries and all of that stuff is that there's actually different kinds of friendships. Because like in my brain, it's just like, are we friends? Are we not friends? Or do I vaguely know who you are, maybe across a room? And that's kind of it. But apparently, usually people just naturally fit their friendships into 8 different categories of friendship. What? What? Truly baffling to me. Also, I will say specifically for me, my language can be confusing because I refer to everybody as a friend, regardless of how well I may or may not know that person, because I am a Quaker, which is a capital F friend, so we refer to the community of Quakers as capital F friends. But also, I personally believe that everybody, regardless of their religion, is part of the same community and therefore refer to everybody as lowercase friends, if you're wondering why I do that. I wanted to call everybody in my life my dear, which is why I say my dears, but some people find that really patronizing, so I don't say that upon the first meeting. I hold it for a couple, times that we meet each other to get their vibe. You didn't need to know any of this, but now you do, so great. Anyway, so the 8 types of relationships, yes, that's where we are. So first we have acquaintances, which are the people you only see when you're like in the dining hall. You say, hey, how are you? What class do you have next? That's really cool. And that's your only social interaction for the week, and you don't plan to pursue anything further. And that's it, and you're cool with that. Then there's the possible friendship, which is like a person that you stop and have like a 5-minute conversation with them in the dining hall, and you've like grabbed dinner together a couple of times, but you've never gone to hang out in each other's rooms. Then we have evolving friendship, which is kind of like the occasional text, the occasional movie night in one of your dorm rooms, something like that. Then we have bonded friendship, which is like you regularly hang out, even when the thing, like school or work, that you have in common and brings you together isn't happening. You have late night heart-to-hearts, all that good stuff. On again, off again friendships are the ones that you enjoy no matter what, but they come and go between all these levels. Very close friends are a small group of people that you have known for a long time who are kind, trustworthy, and sincere. Those are the ones that can watch me curl my hair and I don't get embarrassed. And then there's romantic relationships. And also there are parasocial relationships, which are kind of like the relationship between you, the viewer, and me, the human that you are watching on a screen. Because you think that you know a lot about me and you think that I am like, you understand who I am, and you might on some level, but also I don't know anything about you. So it's very weirdly one-sided and very strange if you think about it for more than like 10 seconds. There's a really great video about parasocial relationships and handling them. I found it the other day and I will link it in the description for you if you want to check it out. But anyway, I personally find that these tiers of friendship are incredibly illogical and they make no sense because the majority of my friendships have been us entering each other's lives, texting 24/7 for the whole time we're together, like a job or something, school, etc. And then once that thing ends and we don't see each other all the time, we completely forget that the other one exists because we have no object permanence. And then eventually one meme appears that reminds us of them, and then we send it, and then we talk nonstop for a week, and then we have another period where we don't talk for an extended period of time, and then we go back and forth and back and forth. And that option isn't on the list, so I don't know what to do. But maybe if you have friendships with neurotypicals, which I don't have a lot of experience with, you can figure out where their interactions might fall on this list and then plan yours accordingly so that you don't seem overbearing. If you want. You also don't have to change anything at all whatsoever, and you can keep on doing what you're doing. I totally support it. I just want to make sure that you have all of the options available to you. So, the thing with setting boundaries is that if you're not used to saying no, learning to set boundaries can feel really, really icky and gross and difficult to do. And that is totally okay. And it's better late than never. It's going to take some practice, but it will feel more natural as time goes on. I promise. And I know I personally was afraid to start setting boundaries after never really doing that because I thought that people were going to suddenly hate me. And a thing that I've learned is that if they do hate you for setting a boundary, that means they were probably taking advantage of you. Or you committed to a thing that you really shouldn't have committed to, and then you dropped the ball and they're mad at you for not doing the thing. But it's usually the taking advantage of thing. And if they say, if you truly cared about me, you wouldn't be, setting this boundary. And that's a very icky, manipulative thing to say, because not only does setting a boundary show that you care about them because you want to continue to have them in your life and not despise them for breaking your boundaries all the time, and it also shows that you care about yourself and what your needs are, which is very, very important. All boundary setting is advocating for yourself and saying, I will not be treated this way, or I will not do this thing, or anything else. And you shouldn't feel guilty for doing what you need to survive and live healthily. And it's really hard to like who you are as a person if everybody is just steamrolling you all the time. Believe me. Now, I know that it can be difficult and hard because it's awkward and uncomfortable to set boundaries, but trust me that being a little bit uncomfortable for a little bit is much more preferable than feeling violated all of the time and feeling like you can't say no to anything. I'm the kind of person who says yes to literally everything and then does like a gazillion things at once. I had 6 jobs last summer, and then I put everything else before myself, and I have to say you burn out really fast like that. And you can't do everything if you're burnt out, because you can't do anything because you're burnt out and you can't pour from an empty cup. So it's important to learn to say no. And only you know what you are and aren't capable of giving and doing, and you are allowed to decide what those things are. Nobody else is. Also, your boundaries are allowed to look completely and totally different from other people's, because your needs are also allowed to look completely and totally different from other people's. Your boundaries are also allowed to change over time, because humans change over time, and that's how that works. So, how do we set a healthy boundary? Now, when it comes to conversations, some people can just say, hey, that hurt me, or hey, that's offensive and made me feel really icky. Please don't talk like that. Or even just like a look, that usually shuts them up. You could also say, I'm actually not comfortable talking about this. Let's talk about something else. Or you can just change the subject altogether by yourself. That's totally fine, and also setting a boundary. And if you feel really uncomfortable and your fight or flight kicks in, you can just say, I'm sorry, excuse me, and then leave. That's also boundary setting. Or you can just get up and scoot. That's also boundary setting. When it comes to life boundaries, I am a huge fan of being incredibly clear and obvious. If I'm setting a boundary with you, I will typically say, hi, I'm setting a boundary here, or something along similar lines, because I know that I have been yelled at countless times for violating boundaries that I did not even know were set. So I do my best to make it very obvious and clear to other people that I am setting a boundary, and that I would appreciate if they respected that. And I also like to include a little bit of a boundary bridge, where instead of saying, hey, I'm setting a boundary, stop doing this, and then just ending it, I will say, hi, I'm setting a boundary, please don't do this, but you can, talk to me like this, or you can do the thing like this instead, so that they know where to go, so that the other person involved doesn't just get paralyzed by what they can't do, and they actually know what they can. It's also important to remember that other people might not be used to boundary setting and may not get it the first time, or the second time, or the 11th time. That does not mean that what you're doing is wrong. A lot of people just have a really hard time with that, or maybe they're genuinely not getting it and you need to be clearer. Now, when it comes to boundaries, the next question is, when should you set one? How do you know when you need to set one? And for me, I pay very close attention to my health and stress levels, because there's a direct correlation between my health and my stress. The second I have a flare-up or something, I can usually directly attribute it to something in my life that is stressing me out, and that's when I figure out what boundaries I can put up to fix or change or assist that thing. And I've also learned not to please other people out of fear and be quiet about my needs out of anxiety. Okay, not past tense. I'm still learning that. We're working on it, but I am definitely trying. And knowing what you want and need and valuing yourself and those needs is super, super important when it comes to boundary setting. I mean, I try my best to not apologize for having needs and just directly say, hey, this is what I'm experiencing and this is what I need. And just leave it at that, without an I'm sorry in there. Also, if you're unsure about another person's boundaries, you can totally just ask. That's not weird. It's really rare for some reason, but it is not weird at all, and you should totally do it. And also, I've discovered that people find dorky to be cute, so don't be embarrassed if you ask super blatantly. Okay, this isn't totally in the category of boundary setting, but I'm like a huge fan of the, I'm not so good at reading social cues, so are you flirting with me right now? Is that what this is? Because I'm not sure. Friendship versions of that sentence also work quite well too in my experience, and that also makes the person, after they've laughed, go like, oh yeah, they do struggle with social cues, and without realizing they will end up making their communication with you a lot more accessible from then on. I would love to give you more advice on how to deal with boundaries and whatnot going forward, because I know that when you talk about social skills things, they seem so simple and logical, and then it's actually happening and it's suddenly confusing and overwhelming and makes no sense. But I want you to know that you're doing great, you're going to do great, and as long as you communicate clearly with people and know what your own worth is and what you want from life and advocate for your own needs, you'll be good to go. Boundary setting is a very personal and varied thing, so it's hard to give specific advice, but hopefully this gives you some sort of clarity and some sort of jumping off point for your own life. Also, I would love to say that I have created some sort of nicely planned curriculum for my Neurotypical Social Skills series. I haven't. So if there's any, elements of social skills, things that you really struggle with in the most, let me know what they are in the comments. Maybe one of them will be the next installment of this series, or maybe something else will appear in my brain and that'll be what happens. I have no idea. Also, it'll help you to know when the next video in the series comes out by subscribing if you haven't already. But anyway, yeah, as always, thank you for listening. Thank you for learning. Remember, your story isn't over. It is only just begun, and I look forward to seeing you, my dear, in the next one.